Well, hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and savages alike. Welcome to the Thursday edition of the Whitfield Report. I am your host, Sam Whitfield, recording as always from NGC Studios here in South Florida. And I want to thank you so very much for joining me for today's edition of the podcast, whenever you're listening in the past, present, future hour. A big shout out to my friend Wolfgang James as well, who has graciously provided us with that intro track that you're hearing right now. Let's take a listen to that more. Yeah, so that's my friend Wolfgang James. He does great work with bass and guitars. Very talented, and he just offered to let me use that kind of instrumental jam that he made. So, anyway, thanks Wolfgang, very cool. Alright, folks, and we may be using that for the Thursday, podcast from now on. Kind of differ the the political show from the other episodes, as it may be. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, what's going on? It's Thursday. We're here for pop culture and other talk, let's say. And this week is officially the week, ladies and gentlemen. The episode that you've been waiting for a while, and I've been waiting for a while, is here. Or at least one of them is here. So earlier this week, folks, I said that I wasn't going to be reviewing Disney Plus until next week, because on Tuesday, on Tuesday, for those who don't know, for those of you who have been living under a rock, Disney Plus, which is the new on-demand, content streaming service from Disney, officially launched. And Tuesday it was really buggy for a lot of people, obviously because everyone and their mother was trying to get signed up and on to use the service. So the first day or so, it was really buggy, but I signed up the day after on Wednesday, and I had no problem signing up. And last night, my mom and I we watched together, and we watched the first episode of The Mandalorian in the Star Wars section, and then we actually wound up watching 2 films out of the Pixar library. We watched Toy Story 3 and then Cars. She had never seen the original Cars, and she's also a bit of a gearhead, so I figured that might be fun for her to watch, and she enjoyed it. Not a big fan of the other 2 sequels to Cars. They're not terrible, but they're not as good as the first one. I don't think. But, I want to review the service, kind of go over what you get, because that's what a lot of you guys, obviously have been waiting for, and what I've been waiting for. We've all been waiting for, Disney Plus to come out, and now that it's here, I want to review it a little bit. So here's how this is going to go. I'm actually going to do the review in 3 episodes, broken up. So this first episode, I'm doing kind of the review of Disney Plus. This is an initial impressions episode. The service just launched this week. It's not even a full week old, and so this is, an initial impressions review episode. I'm going to be going over what we get, what my impressions of it have been over the past, really 24 hours or so, since that's really all I've had it for, less than that even. And then I was actually, I was talking with my mom about this. I don't really consult with other people, when doing this, on doing the show, but, she's always been supportive of my, podcast endeavor. God bless her for that, alongside many other things, and just being a terrific mother. But she suggested that I do this initial review and then maybe do like a part 2, interview, and maybe 3 months from now or a month from now, as more content gets added, kind of like a secondary impression, and then maybe do like a 3rd episode once the service, so at some point in 2020, I'll probably do like a review of Disney Plus again, kind of explaining, overall, what do I think of the service so far. And who knows, this time next year, once the service is a full year old, I might do like another review. Kind of like how YouTubers do that with, iPhones. Sometimes, if you've ever watched like any of the iPhone or Apple centered, tech channels on YouTube, they'll do that a lot with, iPhones or game consoles, where they'll review it, when it initially comes out, and then they'll do like a second review like a few months down the line, and then they'll do like a third review, like a full year later. So I may be doing this continuously. So think of this as part 1 in a series of reviews. So that's how we're going to do this. Anyway, I want to actually go back first off, kind of what my expectations were of the service, when it was announced. When it was first announced, I have to be honest, folks, I wasn't really excited. When I first heard that Disney Plus was going to be a thing, I wasn't really excited, but I was more just curious, and I was kind of apprehensive about it because after I read, what it was going to be, and that they were going to be including, Disney, Pixar, Marvel, and the Star Wars universe. And I think since it was initially announced, they acquired Fox and National Geographic. But long story short, my concern was initially, I was thinking, okay, they're going to add all this content, so it's going to be like $120 a year or something like that. And there's no way I'm going to pay for that if it's like $150 a year. That's just way too much. I figured with all that content, spanning across like multiple franchises, that they were really going to milk, this thing and really jack up the price. So because of that, I had initially decided not to get too excited about it. You know what I mean? Kind of save, some disappointment. It was actually about 2 months ago or so now, 7 weeks ago, when my friends Jason and Tate of the On Tap podcast, and I know I shout them out an awful lot, but again, shout out to Jason Tate and Andrew, who I haven't met yet, but I hope to chat with him, here in the near future. The first episode of the podcast On Tap from 7 weeks ago, they actually went over what their expectations were for, Disney Plus, specifically as it relates to Marvel. And because Jason's a big Marvel guy, and so am I, and I'll get to that, here in the podcast too. But in their initial, like, what they, in their first episode when they initially previewed Disney Plus, they actually brought up the fact and revealed to me, at least, that the service was going to be like $7.99 a month, or $69 a year. Which when I read that, I went online and I looked up, to see what it was, and I was actually blown away to see that it was in fact $69 for all that content. So that right there is a game changer. You're getting Star Wars, Marvel, Disney, Pixar, Net Geographic, and some Fox, content as well, all for just $69 a year, which, if you were to add up, like, the cost of, like, buying or renting, all the content from each of those properties and franchises individually, well, it would probably be close to, like, a couple hundred, maybe even, like, $1,000 a year or something like that, if you were to buy all that content separately. But the fact that they've bundled that for one low price of $69 is pretty good, I think. So that, so that was my main apprehension at first, and really my own apprehension. But once the price point got announced, I actually got excited. Now, also referring to Jason and Tate and the On Tap guys, and Jason specifically, Jason's been going back and listening to my old archive of the Whitfield Report. And I know this because he sent me a text like a week ago or so, saying that, okay, so about, like, I don't know, 3-4 months ago, no, more than that, probably like a year ago now, maybe even a year and a half ago now, when I started doing the, Thursday, like, culture critique episodes, I did an episode where I critiqued Marvel, and I said that, well, I liked Marvel a lot, and again, folks, I do. I'm a Marvel guy. I like Marvel and DC, but I grew up reading Marvel comics, like, primarily. I grew up with Spider-Man, the X-Men, and the Avengers and all those guys. Like, I was into Marvel comics before the MCU, and in fact, like, the first time I went into New York City when I was in first grade, and this was, like, right around 9/11, the reason why I wanted to go to New York City, and this was typical 6-year-old boy behavior, I guess, so I wanted to go to New York City because Spider-Man lived, in New York City, and so did all the other superheroes I loved, so 6-year-old me wanted to see New York City because, that's where his favorite superheroes all lived. Go figure. So, I've been a Marvel fan for years. I've talked, before on the show about my comic book, fandom, some of the stories that have really impacted me on a personal level in my life and, kind of helped me through some growing pains, in my life when I was a teenager. Um, and I've also loved the MCU and watching that develop and grow. But as I noted last year in the podcast, and Jason gave me shit for saying this, and maybe rightfully so now, but one of the complaints I had always had about the MCU once it started going gangbusters was that Marvel was putting out too much content. And Jason actually texted me like a few weeks ago and said, I heard your podcast where you said Marvel puts out too much content, and I'm now crying. And he sent me the sad emoji, whatnot. So that was pretty funny. But I believe what I was referring to and what my initial concern was, for those of us who have, watched the, MCU movies in their entirety for the past, couple years, Marvel has threaded a very, in-depth and complex, web together, starting at phase 1 in the, late 2000s when the universe started. We got phase 2, phase 3, and now we just finished phase 4 with, Avengers Endgame and, the first decade of the MCU. And now I guess we're we finished phase 3 or we're heading into phase 4, when we finished phase 4 and now we're heading into phase 5, I think. One of those two, but either way, it's been a decade. One of the things that I was concerned about, because I'd actually noticed this, was, okay, so my parents, right, when I was a kid, they took me to see, like, the first few, Iron Man movies and the first Captain America movies. But then as I got older, in high school and started, going out with my friends to see the movies, they weren't watching the Marvel movies as much, right? And so, when Avengers Infinity War came out, I remember I re-rented it before Endgame, and I watched it with my mom, and she didn't like it because she felt that she was like really confused, as to like, what events had happened, because there were lots of like Marvel movies that she hadn't seen, and so, and same with my dad. My dad was even worse because my dad has two little girls by his second marriage, right? And so, he hasn't exactly been watching Marvel stuff per se, all of the content. He's been stuck watching it, his princesses and, little girl stuff, which, when you're a dad and you have daughters, that's what you've got to do. But he hadn't been watching the Marvel movies either, so, I guess he actually rented Infinity War. Or no, it wasn't just that. It was, he rented Infinity War, and then also, when I was back in Denver visiting him I think summers ago now, we had gone to see Spider-Man: Homecoming, and again that had referenced a whole bunch of Marvel movies that he had not seen. So because of that, he didn't enjoy it as much, and neither did my mom with Infinity War. So I began to realize that Marvel was putting out. The reason I said that Marvel was putting out too much content was it's very hard for the unless you're like really into the MCU, right? Unless you're super into the MCU, it's very hard for casual moviegoers to really get into the storylines of some of these Marvel movies because they all reference each other so much, and if you're really not caught up on the entirety of the MCU, at least from my observation, you're going to be lost at this point, in the franchise. So, that's been my biggest critique of the MCU is, they've done a great job of, world building, better than anyone thought possible. But, up until a week ago, it was very inaccessible for, only casual moviegoers. Well, now, with, Disney Plus, Marvel, people can just go in and watch all the Marvel movies and get caught up, unlimited. So there's no excuse now not to really be able to get into the universe, even if you're a casual watcher. And I had initially said that one of my hopes for, Marvel was that they would do that, for Disney Plus, and they've done that so far. So, so Disney must have listened to my podcast where I said they were putting out, too much content that would overwhelm casual viewers, and they listened, and they addressed that with Disney Plus. So I'm happy, and plus, I mean, I don't own all the movies either, but it's it's nice to be able to stream all of them now and not have to worry about, where did I put my disc, or am I, do I have a complete set, or am I missing a Marvel movie, and whatnot. And, I know that they're going to be developing original series too, and whatnot. My only complaint, and it's not really even something having to do with, Marvel and Disney, but I am sad that we're not getting like season 4 of Daredevil or, season 3 of The Punisher. Those were Netflix shows back when Marvel was, partnering up with Netflix. I really enjoyed those shows. They're still on Netflix. And for any of you who haven't checked out, Daredevil or The Punisher or Jessica Jones, those are all really good series. And, I highly recommend them. But I'm sad that we're not getting, those shows added into the MCU because those are terrific shows. And I think those would be, great on the, Disney platform. But again, Disney doesn't have the rights to those yet. So it may be a while, before Daredevil is fully in the MCU again. But, it's a bummer that we're missing those shows from Disney Plus Marvel. But it's also, one of the plus sides is that we now also have like all of the old Spider-Man cartoons from the, 90s and, early 2000s, even going back to like the 70s and the 60s, we have those. We have the Fantastic Four animated series. Basically, all of like the cartoons that I grew up with as a kid, in the Marvel, universe. We have those, so that's pretty cool. Although you can really tell that they're, 90s cartoons, because they're not optimized at all for high definition. And, you can tell if you're watching on like a high definition TV. But, it's nostalgia, so it's still pretty cool. Basically, I think Marvel's off to a really strong start with their section. Now, Star Wars. Let's move on to Star Wars. First off, I think it should be said that the fact that we can now stream all 7 Star Wars movies, excluding, The Last Jedi, which I think is still streaming on Netflix, is, pretty incredible. That we can watch, the Star Wars movies anytime and from any device. That's incredible. That it's part of that service. There were people who were like, when are you gonna buy the iTunes version of the Star Wars trilogy? It's $100. That way you can have on your iPad and your iPhone for like trips and But I knew that they were going to be coming out with that they were probably going to be adding all those movies onto Disney Plus. So I decided to save my money, and I'm glad I did. So I'm just super happy that I can stream the Star Wars movies whenever I want to now. That's pretty cool. Lots of people have been asking about the Mandalorian, Star Wars' first live-action series about the Mandalorian race. Overall, first impressions of the Mandalorian, it's good. I think, considering that this is the first like live action TV series that has been done in the Star Wars, universe, it's really good. It looks like the Star Wars universe that we've come to know and love, for the past 40 years. I also think it's interesting that they started off, with the Mandalorian, considering that, Mandalorians, unless you're really into the Star Wars lore, people don't really know what Mandalorians are. Obviously, us hardcore Star Wars fans know that they're a race of bounty hunters, and that's where Boba and Jango Fett are initially descended from, but not a lot of I guess normie people know that. So the Mandalorian I think is pretty good. It takes place right after the events of Return of the Jedi, so in between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens. And it's about Mandalorian bounty hunter. It kind of has like a Wild West, meets space opera vibe, which is ironic because George Lucas, in an interview that I once watched in a documentary on Star Wars, on the making of Star Wars, once said that was like his entire, plan for Star Wars. Initially, it was like the Wild West meets space opera, and then Star Wars became its own thing. And so now, I guess the Mandalorian, in a very interesting way, is kind of literally going to the Wild West, meets space opera. So that's very interesting. Episodes are being released weekly, which I talked about that a bit last week when I did the streaming wars episode. Lots of streaming services like Disney Plus and like Apple TV Plus are starting to do that now, where they release episodes of shows weekly instead of entire, seasons to binge. Right? Netflix kind of set the precedent for, binge watching entire seasons, of shows, in one weekend if you wanted to. But now we're kind of going back to the weekly release schedule, for some of these shows. And it's a bummer if you really like to binge watch things, but I don't know. I actually kind of like being able to, digest different series. So that's certainly something to keep in mind. As I said at the very beginning of the podcast, having, the entire Pixar library, like I said, my mom seems to be, more of the Pixar fan. Not that I don't like Pixar, but it's kind of like for her it's nostalgia because when I was a little itty bitty thing, she took me to see all the Pixar movies when I was a kid, and so she likes those. And then of course we have the main Disney library, which is pretty cool too. So overall, what are my first impressions of the Disney Plus service? Very very strong. Definitely worth the 7-day free trial. I'm signed up annually, so that's $70 a year. So again, really good value for everything you get. Plus, I haven't checked this out, but The Simpsons are streaming on Disney Plus because they now own Fox. And so now I'm wondering if House and 24 and some of the more, drama-based Fox series are going to be on there eventually as well. The X-Files maybe. I don't know, but it would certainly be interesting. Now, I guess that there's also a deal that you have where you can bundle, I guess, Hulu, Disney Plus, and ESPN Plus, as like a package deal. And to be honest, I mean, if you want to do that, I guess that's cool. But I've never really liked Hulu all that much as far as like their user interface. Their user interface when I used it was horrible, like 5 years ago, and I hear mixed things about Hulu. And then, not to get into politics, but ESPN is just so far left, and they've basically like politicized sports so much that I can't put that aside now, just because it's so over, Disney and the entertainment. I mean, yeah, that, Hollywood is pretty far left and, some of their thing, but Disney actually has managed to, I guess, stay partially neutral on some of that. So I can overlook, a lot of that. But ESPN, I certainly can't. And then Hulu is just weird. So I'm not doing the package deal. I'm only doing Disney Plus, but it's still a good deal. And if you want to bundle the 3 packages, I guess you can. So overall, that's my initial impressions of Disney Plus, and yeah, I'm very excited to see what the future holds, and to see how the service expands and grows, over the next year plus. And as I said, I'll be keeping an eye on that on this podcast, and letting you know what I think. And who knows, maybe Jason and Tay and I or maybe Jason and Matt Dallas and I, or maybe Matt Dallas and I will do a roundtable at some point in 2020, kind of comparing what we like and dislike about Disney Plus, and keep an eye on that. So anyway, folks, I know it's a shorter podcast. We're at 35 minutes, but anyway, those were really all the notes that I had on Disney Plus. So that'll do it for this week's Thursday podcast. I want to thank you so very much for joining me. A couple quick announcements. I'm finishing up the survey, so I will try and launch that this weekend. For those of you who want to fill out a brief survey on the Whitfield Report podcast, I would really appreciate that. And again, just stay up to date with my social media feed and to keep an eye out for when that's coming. Also, I'll be live streaming the show on Saturday at 10 p.m. as usual on my YouTube channel. And I'll have some more announcements about YouTube on the Saturday stream as well. Merch store is coming. I'll work on that this week in a bit. Alright, as far as social media goes, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at @SamDeeper_NGC. Hashtag Whitfield Report, hashtag Sam Savages. Gab and Minds at Sam Whitfield. TheSamWhitfield.com is the website. Facebook.com/The Whitfield Report is where you can follow me on Facebook. And please, if you're on Apple Podcasts, please give this podcast a 5-star review. And if you would like to financially support the podcast, you can do so either by going to anchor.fm/Whitfield Report for monthly, support, or for one-time donations, paypal.me/Whitfield Pod. And folks, that'll do it for the Whitfield Report for this week, for the Thursday show. I will be back on Saturday for the live stream. Until then, folks, God bless, God save this great nation, God, freedom, legacy in that order. And I want to thank you all for tuning into the program. Play us out, Wolfgang, and thanks for listening to the program, folks, and God bless. Hey there, folks. If you've made it this far to the end of the podcast, I'd like to thank you very much for listening to the show. You are the ones that make it possible for me to make an income from podcasting, and I greatly appreciate that just by listening to our show. You are helping us gain ad revenue. However, if you would really like to help support the show, I encourage you to please donate to the podcast and become a supporter of the show. You can head over to anchor.fm/Whitfield Report and click the support this podcast button and choose the amount that suits you to support the show. Or you can click the link in the show notes and it will directly take you to that page. If you can support the podcast, I really, really appreciate that. Anything that you can do to help out is greatly appreciated. Even if you can't afford to help financially support the podcast, I encourage you to please go on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or Stitcher and please leave this podcast a positive 5-star review. That really helps us out here at the Whitfield Report. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next episode.